A bobcat is not the kind to remember names. It doesn't call, it doesn't look back. Yet through that entire winter, 4 wild paw prints circled the old cabin, like they were patrolling, like they were guarding something precious. No one knew why. No one could explain why, after months of being released back into the wild. They came back, not to beg for food, not because they were injured, but to return a favor. That night in the blizzard, when the old man collapsed in the snow, believing all was lost, they appeared. And what happened after that will forever change the way you see nature. At the edge of the Montana plains, where winter winds sing through rotting timber and deer tracks dot the snow, there lived a man named Thomas Callahan, or as everyone in town called him, Old Tom the Woodworker. He lived alone in an old wooden house, its back resting against sparse pine woods, its front facing a seemingly endless prairie. 68 years old, his calloused hands were still as strong as when he was a soldier, but his eyes had taken on the quiet weight of someone who had seen too many goodbyes. After his wife died of cancer and his son moved to Minneapolis to build a life, he retreated from the world, making wooden chairs for the church, repairing fences for the fire station, and keeping the porch light on through the snowy seasons, as if waiting for someone who would never return. One morning in early April, when the ground had just thawed and the air still held the scent of melting stone, an unfamiliar sound broke the usual silence, the crunch of tires on gravel. A silver pickup, caked in mud, rose out of the dirt road, steaming and breathing white smoke, stopping before the workshop. Tom squinted through the kitchen window, then slowly set down his coffee cup. The man stepping out was Caleb, wildlife rescue officer, lifelong friend, and the only one who still visited Tom, even though he was never invited. Caleb was in his early 40s, tanned, eyes bright, like someone who'd long lived among the wounded. But this time, something in his face was different, urgent, heavy, as if he were carrying something fragile and impossible to refuse. Tom opened the door before Caleb could knock. "Building a coffin for someone?" he asked, half joking. Caleb smiled faintly, shook his head, and walked around to the back of the truck. "Number, but there are some little ones who need someone like you." And when Tom stepped closer, what he saw inside the straw-lined box began to change the rest of his life. "You don't come out of the woods this early unless it's serious," Tom said, standing under the eaves, hands still dusted with sawdust. Caleb didn't answer right away. He circled to the back of the truck, opened the tailgate, and gently lifted down a large wooden crate. There were no straps, just a few scrapes, as if it had been packed in a rush. "I found this on the way back from the Eastern Rescue Station," he said, voice hoarse in the cold wind. Tom slowed his step, eyes scanning the crate, and when he looked inside, he froze. 4 tiny beings curled into each other, their fur soft as spring grass, their bodies trembling gently in the warm straw. Their eyes, bright blue like a lake not yet frozen over, stared straight at Tom. Not with fear, not with affection, just emptiness, like children who hadn't yet realized their mother would never return. "Their mother was hit by a forestry truck on Ridge Hollow Road," Caleb said, voice lower now. "By the time I got there, it was too late. The cubs were hiding in a tree hollow nearby." Tom said nothing. He only bent down, reaching a hand toward one of them, and it hissed, baring tiny milk teeth, not out of aggression, but out of a desperation that had no name yet. "Bozeman's rescue center is overloaded," Caleb continued. 2 weeks at the earliest before they'll take them. And me, you know how it is. My dogs see these little guys, and it's a disaster waiting to happen." Tom looked up. The wind carried the scent of old snow, damp wood, and the warm breath of animals. He didn't say, "Let me think." He didn't ask, "Why me?" He simply opened the door to the workshop and said, "Bring them in." The back room of the workshop, once used to store unfinished wooden pieces, quickly became a nest. Caleb brought over a heater, special milk, small syringes, and a worn book on caring for wild animals. "Remember, Tom," he said one last time, "these aren't house cats. Don't name them. Don't let them get used to people. They need to go back to the forest." Tom only nodded. But when night fell, the soft cries from the crate kept him awake. Not because they bothered him, but because, in their faint breathing, he heard something achingly familiar. Like those nights in the hospital when he and his wife took turns watching over their feverish son. The year everything began to change. And then, one by one, he named them. The largest male, his coat the color of rust stains on timber, he called him Bran. The tiniest female who cried before every meal, he named Lark. The curious boy who climbed cabinets, Finn. And the last one, always hiding in the corner, staring like she could read his mind, Mira. Every 3 hours, even in the middle of the night, Tom would rise, heat the milk, pour just enough into the syringe, wrap himself in a blanket, and sit beneath the oil lamp. He patiently fed them drop by drop, cleaning their bodies with warm cloths, like a mother licking her young clean. Sometimes they squirmed, sometimes they lay still, eyes closed, tiny paws resting on his wrist like a final breath left behind by their mother. The workshop came alive in ways it never had before. The old machines seemed to fall silent for a holier reason. 4 beings, still scented with milk, were growing day by day in the care of a man who had long forgotten how to keep anything alive. Time moves faster when you don't want it to. Within weeks, the babies in the straw were no longer bundles of whimpering fuzz. Their eyes had changed, from tender spring blue to fierce gold like midsummer sun. Their fluffy baby fur gave way to sharp, patterned coats, wild and untouchable by human hands. They began to climb everything, beams, bookshelves, even his shoulders. Finn once leapt from the table onto Tom's head, chasing a falling leaf. Bran shredded 3 blankets in a single afternoon. Lark hid dried fish in his boots. And Mira, always watching, never playing, but remembering everything. The kids turned the living room into a war zone. Tom muttered into the phone when David called, like winter snow dyed red. But it's pillow guts everywhere. "Dad, I'm serious," David replied, worry in his voice. "You should be careful. Bobcats aren't house pets. What if—" Tom fell silent, glancing toward the door where the 4 creatures chased each other around an old stool. "They know who I am," he said. "The hand that feeds. The voice that reads to them at night, not their captor." But deep down, he knew David was right. Bran had started biting harder during play. Finn leapt nearly to the ceiling beams. Lark no longer slept in the nest. She sat by the door at night, staring into the woods. Mira began to avoid his gaze. Bit by bit, they were remembering what had birthed them. The forest, the hunt, freedom. When Caleb returned in the 2nd month, he stood for a long time on the porch, watching the little ones. "They're healthy," he said, "and too friendly with people. This isn't good. It's time we start planning a withdrawal." Tom's heart tightened like pulling a bowstring in heavy wind. He nodded, not arguing. They need to go wild again, but not today. Caleb thought for a moment, then suggested, "I can help you build a semi-wild enclosure. Outdoors, spacious, with soil, climbing trees, the real scent of nature. You start limiting contact. I'll handle the rest once the center has room." And so they began. With the quiet help of a few local workers, men who never asked anything more than a nod, they built a large fenced enclosure beside the workshop. There were climbing branches, hidden hollows, moss, and cold stones underfoot. The little ones were moved there on a windy morning. Tom brought no chair, no storytelling voice, only food, frozen mice, later wild hare. And he wore a cloth mask each time he entered the pen. No names, no head pats, no lingering. He sat and watched them through the attic window, where moonlight slanted through the wire mesh like a ruler dividing love from letting go. But sometimes, on the quiet summer evenings, he still sat in the wooden chair by the fence, holding an old book, reading aloud. The old oak still stood by the stream where the boy had once promised to return. His husky voice would echo. Bran would lie near the fence, eyes closed. Mira wouldn't look, but her ears would twitch. Lark and Finn would play, but never wander far. As if, in the midst of wild instinct, a thin thread still connected them to the first name they ever heard from a human voice. When summer reached its peak, word came from the rescue center. They were ready to take the 4 wild youngsters. But just then, a sudden wildfire broke out in the southwest. Many wild animals were evacuated. Priorities shifted. It might take a few more weeks, Caleb said helplessly. Not ideal, but that's the reality. Tom looked over at the pen. The Bobcats were no longer kittens. They had begun hiding prey, digging, avoiding strangers. Once, when a delivery man arrived, all 4 vanished into the shadows as if they had never existed. They're remembering their instincts, Tom said softly. And I'm learning how to forget attachment. On a late July evening, as Tom brought dinner to the pen, 1 wild rabbit per bobcat, he noticed something wrong. The latch was off. Not broken, but clearly twisted. Maybe from the storm last week, or maybe from the new strength now surging through the limbs of the creatures, once small enough to fit in his palm. He stood still for a moment, dinner still in his hand. A coldness crept in, not from the night wind blowing through his shirt, but from what he now knew with certainty. They could escape at any time. Tom didn't shout. He placed the food in the trough as usual. The 4 ate as if nothing had changed, eyes gleaming, whiskers trembling in the wind. But Tom knew that peace was temporary. He walked into the cabin and called Caleb. "I'll come in the morning," Caleb said, hearing the tension in his voice. "I'll bring tools and a new lock. Do you want me to come now?" Tom looked out the window. Moonlight streamed through the fence, shining across Mira's back as she dozed like a statue beside the hay. All 4 were still there, still calm, still staying. "No," he said quietly. "I think it'll hold until morning. I just want to keep watch tonight." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window with a cold cup of coffee, the oil lamp dimly lit, just enough to see the shadows of the creatures he had raised with what remained of his life. Now and then, Bran would lift his head to look toward the cabin, as if he knew the man was still awake, still watching. The next morning, Caleb arrived with 2 people from the rescue center. They inspected the pen, repaired the gate, and reinforced the fence with steel mesh. Then they said what Tom had known before they spoke. "It's time." Tom didn't reply. He just stood there, hand gripping the strap of his woodworking apron as if it could hold time in place. They had changed so much, not just in size and weight, but in their gaze too. Deeper, farther. No longer tracking him as he passed, no longer calling out when hungry. They had begun to hear the forest's wind, to dream of things with no humans in them. The capture wasn't easy. Mira was the first to crouch in a corner, scratching wildly when caged. Finn hid beneath dry leaves. Lark made no sound. Bran was the last. He didn't resist, but his eyes never left Tom, not until the cage door closed. As the truck doors shut and the vehicle prepared to leave, Tom stepped closer to Bran's crate. He didn't touch it, just placed a hand on the rough wood panel. Bran growled softly. Not in threat, just the sound of a creature who had remembered the forest, but not yet forgotten the man. Go, Tom whispered. It's the right thing. I know it, and you do too. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. You saved them. No one else could have done what you did. Tom nodded, saying nothing. His eyes burned. For the first time in many years, they burned as if sawdust had lodged deep inside his chest. The truck rolled away, carrying 4 nameless parts of a man's heart, one who had thought he had lived long enough to never love anything new again. Autumn returned like a gentle farewell. The fields blazed golden, the grass turned dark brown. The wind carried the scent of ripe fruit and dry soil. Tom returned to his old routine, whittling, patching the roof, reading by the fire. But this time, he read alone. Caleb still visited, bringing updates from the center. The youngsters were healthy, mature, good hunters, responding appropriately to danger. More remarkably, they were kept as a group, a rare trait for bobcats, because they moved as one, cooperating, sharing prey, keeping each other warm on cold nights. They're unlike any group we've seen, Caleb said. Maybe because they were raised in love. Tom smiled, something quiet and unnamed shining in his eyes. Or maybe they just heard too much Jack London. They're not like any bobcat group we've ever seen, Caleb repeated, holding a steaming cup of coffee, gazing out the misted window. They hunt like wolf cubs, not solitary cats, he added. Sticking close, sharing food, calling for each other when there's danger. Completely unlike the species' usual instinct to live alone. Tom nodded slightly, not surprised. They grew up in a world where no one taught them they had to be alone, he said. I just read them too much, Jack London. Maybe they think they're a pack. November painted the plains with dry grass and lavender sunsets. The first winter winds carried the knock of coming snow. When Caleb called to say the young ones had been released in a forest 20 miles away, Tom only paused for a moment. They left together, Caleb said. Stepped out of the crate slowly, looked around, then disappeared into the woods like water running downhill. Tom hung up. He sat on the wooden steps outside the workshop, alone, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. Night fell, and wind howled through the cracks in the door. And around him was silence. No more claws clicking on the floor, no golden eyes peeking through slats. Only an empty pen out back, still scented with fresh wood, and inside it, a part of his heart that he didn't yet know where to hide. Winter descended on the outskirts like a reminder that humans don't belong here. Snow fell without pause, covering paths, filling ditches, turning the dirt road to Tom's workshop into a vast, white nowhere. He was used to solitude, but he had never felt so alone as this year. 3 weeks before Christmas, just after dark had fallen and the stove fire had yet to warm the kitchen, the sound of an engine on the empty road made him tense. A strange vehicle, no markings, no sign it belonged to anyone familiar. Tom stood behind the curtain, holding his breath. 2 men stepped out, not looking like anyone in need of help. Their eyes darted quickly, bodies tense, footsteps heavy and unapologetic. He cracked the door open just enough to let the wind pass through. "We're from the electric company," the taller one said, voice gravelly. "Heard there was a line down nearby. Radio's out. Mind if we use your phone real quick?" Tom didn't answer right away. He knew full well his power was still on. No lines had fallen, and real utility workers didn't scan a man's house like they were pricing the furniture. "I don't have a landline," he replied, voice raspy. "But the ranger station down the road has a satellite phone." The other one scoffed. "You trying to play dumb, old man?" he muttered, voice dropping. "We know this place is isolated. No, you live alone, and we know Sheriff Royce isn't coming up here tonight because of that highway accident down in town." Tom remained still, hand resting on the doorknob. The wind howled through the gap, carrying with it a bitter chill and a deep instinct. They were here to rob. Maybe worse. He didn't need more proof. The way they said, "old man," the smaller one's gaze flitting from his workbench to the wooden cabinets, then landing on the old pocket watch hanging on the wall, like assigning value to every object, told him everything. They weren't here for help. "I'm afraid. My landline's out since yesterday," Tom said, voice as calm as when he used to read bedtime stories to the cubs. "But the Hendersons, 2 miles down the hill, have a satellite line. You could—" "Listen here, old man." The smaller guy cut him off, stepping forward, a gleam in his eyes that was anything but kind. "It's freezing out here. Just let us inside to warm up for a bit, that's all." Tom tightened his grip on the doorknob. His eyes didn't leave the taller one, the one with the stance of a man who'd held power in backroom brawls. And just then, he lifted the edge of his coat. He didn't have to draw it fully. Tom saw enough. The cold gleam of metal, gun-shaped, tucked at his waist. "I don't think you understand the situation," the man said, voice low like a dying fire. "We're coming in. How is up to you." Tom inhaled deeply. Fear was something that had long lain dormant in him, but tonight it stirred. Not for himself, but for the memories of his wife, of the son who used to sleep on this very wooden floor, and of 4 furred souls who once called this place home. "Sheriff Royce still drops by daily in this weather," he said, voice steady. "Should be here soon. Maybe you ought to." "Oh, that's rich." The smaller man laughed, dry and sharp. "We know Royce is stuck in town because of the pileup. No one's coming to save you tonight, old man." Tom's heart clenched, not from cold, but from the certainty in their words. They had planned this. "You got meds?" the taller one asked, pushing the door open. "Cash, antiques? That watch looks real nice." Tom stepped back, offering no resistance. He wasn't stupid. "Cash is in a jar by the stove," he said. "Just spare change for emergencies." "Show us," the man ordered, raising the gun. The other one began rifling through drawers, eyes twitching like a hungry ferret. Tom led them into the kitchen, and as he passed the back door, the one that led to the snow-covered yard and the now empty pen, he saw something that made his heart pause for a beat. The pen door was ajar. It could have been the wind, or maybe the latch had loosened days ago. Whatever the reason, it was a sliver of hope. In the kitchen, Tom opened the cupboard. "It's in one of these jars. Take whatever you want." His hands trembled, not just from the gun, but from the idea that had just flashed in his mind. "Hurry up, old man," the guy barked. "I don't have all night." Tom reached for a jar on the top shelf, then deliberately knocked over the others. Crash! The glass exploded. Tomato sauce splattered across the floor like spilled blood. The man yelled, stumbling back. In that instant, Tom bolted for the back door. He flung it open, slipped on the icy steps, then hurled himself into the night. Pain, breathless gasps. But he didn't stop. Behind him, shouting, a slamming door. Footsteps crunching on snow. Once a soldier, once fast through gunfire. But now, at 68, he knew he couldn't outrun them on foot. Only one hope remained. The pen. Only one silent prayer. If you remember, if somewhere in your bones you still carry a piece of this place, then please. Tom dragged himself inch by inch through the snow, breath tearing like the final thread holding him to life. The pain in his ankle made each attempt to rise feel like the world spinning off its axis. Behind him, flashlight beams whipped through the dark, and one man hissed, You're just making this worse, you old freak! Snow slammed into his face. Wind lashed his ears. He crawled like a wounded animal toward the wooden pen, hoping to find the old padlock inside. But that hope was melting under the cold feet of reality. Then suddenly, a sound. Deep, low, inhuman. Not a growl, not a screech, but a primal warning, the kind that once drove humanity deeper into caves when night fell. The shorter man froze. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, flashlight trembling. Then it came, leaping from the dark. A large, fluid form, striped like a forest shadow, shot forward like a velvet arrow. The impact sent the man sprawling, blood blooming red across the snow like spilled ink. In the flickering beam of the remaining flashlight, Tom saw clearly. A bobcat. Fully grown, muscular, eyes blazing. And it wasn't alone. From the tree line, 3 more shapes slinked forth. Smooth as smoke, sharp as blades. They moved without sound, but formed a circle, precise like a formation trained by ancestral memory. The taller man drew his gun and fired. A burst of flame, a roar from the shadows. They didn't retreat, just shifted position. Closer, tighter, teeth bared, eyes no longer those of wild beasts, but guardians of a home. "God damn it!" the man screamed. "Run!" No more bravado. No more threats. Just the frantic crunch of boots stumbling through snow as the 2 men fell, scrambled up, and ran like hunters turned hunted. They fled toward the truck. Another shot rang, hitting a tree. The engine shrieked. The truck skidded on ice, nearly smashing into a pine trunk, then vanished into the night. Silence fell like a torn white blanket. The wind screamed again. And there was Tom, lying in the snow. His knee was torn, hands numb, back soaked. The heart is still struggling to remember how to beat slowly again. He turned his head. Slowly. They were still there. The 4 bobcats, not chasing, not disappearing. They stood close to him, silent, eyes unblinking. The largest, the one who had attacked first, stepped forward. Moonlight glinted off his tawny coat, revealing a faint white streak on his left cheek. Bran. Tom couldn't speak right away. His voice caught, not from the cold, but because his throat was holding back a wave. "You," he whispered. "How?" Bran stopped a few steps away, lifted his head, then let out a low, soft sound, a chuff, like an old greeting, and in that moment, he knew. It wasn't a chance. It wasn't an illusion. They had come back. Locke stepped forward quietly, standing to his left. Finn slipped through a branch, slow as if afraid to hurt him. Mira came last, still cautious, but with that same gaze that had once listened to Jack London from the port. 4 wild creatures now forming a half circle around him. No hissing, no growling. They simply kept him warm, backs to the wind, faces to the forest, as if they had once learned somewhere that the weak is not prey, if it is family. Tom bowed his head. He never taught them that. They learned it themselves, from winter nights filled with stories, from silent touches, from how he never abandoned a single one of them, no matter how much they hissed or refused to eat. "Thank you," he said, voice trembling. A whisper into the night, into the wind. To the children, no human would ever accept that he had. It was them, Bran, Lark, Finn, and Mira. No mistake. Not just because of the white streak on Bran's cheek or Mira's tiptoeing gait, but because of how they stood there, surrounding him like 4 quiet stars in a sky full of snow. Not lost, not wild, just belonging. You're unbelievable," Tom murmured, voice hoarse from cold and tears. They were supposed to be 20 miles away in the national forest, where nighthawks called and owl shadows danced across the treetops. Yet here they were, in the heart of a brutal snowstorm, on the very night he needed a miracle. Bran stepped closer, near enough that Tom could feel the warmth of a body he never thought he'd feel again. He lowered his head and sniffed Tom's hand, the one that had once fed him, wiped away his blood, and given him his name. Then, like a silent leader, Bran gave a soft, low chuff. At once, the 4 Bobcats formed a semicircle, their bodies shielding him from the wind, their eyes fixed on the woods behind, as if danger still lurked. Tom understood. They hadn't come back to be recognized. They'd come back to protect. He spoke gently, like reading to them one last time. "My leg hurts. I need to get back to the cabin." And without any command, without any cue, they moved with him. Every step he took, slow, leaning on tree trunks, fences, or sheer old grit, they stayed with him, keeping just enough distance, never straying. Mira kept to his left, constantly glancing back. Locke would run ahead and then return to check. Finn stayed on his right side, paws as light as falling leaves. And Bran, always in the rear, guarding. When he reached the wooden railing, just a few steps from the cabin door, he turned around. They didn't follow up further. They just sat quietly in the snow, eyes shining under the moonlight, holding formation like 4 sentinels needing no training, only heart. "Thank you," he whispered. "Tonight, you saved me." When Royce arrived the next morning with a nurse and Caleb after the road had been temporarily cleared for access, they found Tom alive, conscious, but utterly exhausted. His leg was wrapped in makeshift bandages, his body trembling slightly, but his eyes shone like lanterns in a rainy night. "How the hell did you survive the night, Tom?" Royce asked while pouring water. Tom looked up and replied like a breeze, "Old visitors dropped by." Royce frowned. Tom pointed to the window, where dozens of Bobcat tracks still dotted the snow. "They came back," he said. "All 4 of them." "Mine." Caleb froze. Tom told them everything. From the chase to the warming circle. Every detail, no exaggeration. None needed. Royce chuckled at first, but when he stepped outside and bent to see the paw prints, clear even, and the blood still pooled near the broken pine, he stopped laughing. "Good Lord," he murmured, "and people say animals don't feel gratitude." News spread fast. About the old carpenter, about the snowy night and the robbers, and about the 4 wild shadows who returned when the forest had already called them away. Some believed it. Some didn't. But no one dared call Tom a senile old man. Because whenever the snow fell again, people would see Bobcat tracks around the cabin, never too close, never inside. Just enough for someone to see and believe. That love, once sown with trembling but honest hands, always finds its way back, even through a snowstorm, even on pause. "They found their way back," Royce said, still in disbelief. "In the middle of a blizzard, after months in the wild. They remembered you." Tom didn't reply right away. He just stared out the window where the paw prints had almost faded under new snow. Then he nodded, slowly. "Someone once told me wild things don't feel gratitude," he said. "I think they were wrong." Royce smiled. "I think a lot of folks in town are starting to wonder about that too." The story spread like early spring wind. Quiet, but unstoppable. People on the outskirts began saying they saw Bobcats near Tom's home. Not 1, but 4 silent shapes. Never approaching strangers, but never too far from the quiet plot where the workshop stood like a trace of memory. Some didn't believe. Some half laughed, half believed. but everyone began to look into the forest differently. Tom finally listened to his son, installed a security system. Though he still joked, "No device guards better than 4 wild kids who once slept in your kitchen." He also adopted a large dog from the rescue shelter. Not for protection, he insisted. Just that. Old folks should have company. Strangely, the Bobcats didn't react. The first time they saw the dog, they stood afar, watching. No approach, no growl, as if they understood. It was part of the pack now. When spring truly returned, Tom often sat on the porch of the workshop, hot tea in hand, the dog at his feet. On those afternoons, when the light kissed the tips of the grass, he would see shadows move near the forest edge. They never crossed the boundary. They didn't need to. They were there because they chose to be. And on the quietest nights, when the wind fell silent and the full moon hung like a story untold, Tom would take out a book, open it, and read aloud like he used to. His voice would glide over grass, through the fence and into the woods. He didn't know if they still listened. It didn't matter, because what he read wasn't just for ears, it was for hearts to remember. In a world too used to boundaries, between man and beast, between tame and wild, between memory and forgetting, Tom and the 4 Bobcats had created something else. A circle of care, without rope, without cage, without condition. A simple but fierce testimony that kindness, if given freely, without asking for return, can find its way back on the very night you thought you were most alone.